life. Watching the movie for a second time as a musician who's familiar now much more with the way that Nazis had used music to torture, to ban, to humiliate on many levels. I think that the movie provides us a very small window to understanding this through some of the scenes, and I'm happy to speak about it later. But the main thing that I wish to share with you as a musician is more of lack of music throughout a movie that is titled The Pianist. So the question is, how and why is music not central to this movie, in which we begin watching it with anticipation to listen to the music, but it is not as much there. And one of the strongest scenes that I experienced in the movie was when the family, the Spielmann family, has to part with their piano, a Bechstein grand piano that I know today a Bechstein piano can cost as much as a house in the Midwest. So the parting with that piano in the first scenes of the movie is parting with identity of those middle class Jewish, Polish Jewish people who made it and had to give it away. We don't see them practicing Judaism as much as they practice European culture, at least in my opinion. The lack of music is also throughout. I feel when I hear the excerpts of various Chopin pieces, we don't hear them in their entirety. We just hear little snippets of music, something that gives us the taste of emotion, perhaps something that is about to come, but a lot of it is taken away and left for us to question, where is it? So this is hopefully informative enough way to open this discussion tonight about the movie.
I was actually thinking about some of what you were saying, because the musical score for the movie is done by Wojciech Kielin, who is Polish, and yes, the movie itself is directed by Roman Polanski, who also is a Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust, but he himself didn't have a particularly strong Jewish background. He had been in Paris and moved back to Krakow with his family shortly before the war began, 37 or 38. So it left me wondering, actually, if, and it's not the first time I've thought this, but if on some small level, there might be elements of his kind of cultural Polish Jewishness woven through it, as opposed to any kind of religiosity. So just my own thought about that.
Yes, Sarah, I couldn't agree with you more. And this is also something that I was that was going through my mind today. This correlation between Spielmann and Polanski. The fact that they saw themselves Polish citizens of Europe. Polanski himself, not Polanski, Spielmann himself stayed in Warsaw after the war. He remained Polish. He had, in my, as much as I know, did not have strong ties to perhaps Israel or Judaism. And when I began reading the memoir, it seems to me that the movie is more Polanski than Spielmann in some ways. The way he organizes the scenes differently than it is in the memoir. So I agree with you on that.
He also, this was, and I haven't finished the memoir, I'm only partially through it, but it struck me that the passiveness of Adrian Brody / Spielman in this is somehow Polanski's view of the situation, because when you read passages in Spielman's book, he was not passive, and he also wasn't silent. He made all kinds of comments about things that he saw, about the horribleness of some of the things that he encountered. He's not silent on it, but Polanski makes him silent. It's interesting.
Yes, and he also makes his character seem as this detached person, detached emotionally from what is going on, uses the music to detach his mind from the realities of the ghetto. Even in the very opening scene, when he plays, it's I think the nocturne that he plays at the opening scene.
You haven't paid attention to the music.
In C sharp minor, in C sharp minor.
Oh, C sharp minor, excuse me.
The bombs are becoming a part of the sound, and he is still playing the piano. And that is something that is very typical of many pianists that I met, especially males. And if there are any males in the audience, please do not get offended by what I say, but there was some detachment from reality that I do not read in his memoir. So that's another thing about his use of music. There is a scene where the father, who was beaten up in the street by a Nazi, comes home, and Spielman is working on a score by the piano. And for us too, as the viewers, when we listen to those sounds, we too, in some way, get a break from the tragedy. And in a way, it also helps us to feel that detachment that by which he's portrayed in the movie, for good and for bad. But I have to say that I'm not quite relating to his personality as it portrays in the movie. And I'm just wondering if this was on purpose or this is just Adrian Brody's acting.
Again, I don't know, but I found it somewhat off-putting. It was, and again, this is both times that I watched it. I guess I was expecting anger or sorrow or something, and you get little bits and pieces of it, which, by the way, are highlighted by the music. I mean, those are the times when the music comes in, so they use the music very, very judiciously throughout this. But in many ways, I almost feel like we're watching everything with him, but he's not emoting, so he's not giving us any guide as he's going through it. Galit, let's move along a little bit, and let's talk about once the family has actually, well, the family, first of all, the family lives in the ghetto, so the area that is walled off includes the area in which the Spielman family apartment existed. So in the early ghetto scenes, what's very interesting is that the Spielman household is not that crowded a household, which flies in the face of all of the accounts that we've read from survivors of the Warsaw ghetto experience, including our own Max Glauben, in which they talk about how crowded it was, multiple families in a room. And you don't get to that until they have been in the ghetto for quite a while. And I think it's simply by dint of the fact that they were in the ghetto area when they were walled in. So let's talk about some of the music as we go forward from those opening scenes.
Yeah, so the first moment where I felt that the music is providing us some clue to the unknown that is about to come was when one of the sisters looked out of the window and she saw people putting bricks one on each other, and she called her other family members, come see what is going on. And then at that point there were two chords. I don't remember if this was E minor going to D minor, but that was just a moment that just by hearing those sounds there was some universal feeling that says that tells us that something horrible is about to happen. And that was also something to say about this movie, that at each time we're beginning the movie from a very high point where the family in its beautiful apartment in Warsaw, everyone is dressed very well, and from that point they go down with each scene until they are all but Spielmann sent to the concentration to the concentration camp. But there was one more very interesting scene, and I would like to present this scene by asking everyone if you would be able and so kind to listen to an excerpt from a musical piece, and perhaps try to recognize it and say, where did you hear that, and what this piece may have been. And I will play maybe a minute or two and see if you recognize this.
So we have a winner.
We have a winner.
I think it's Veronique or Hilton Jonas. I'm actually guessing it's Veronique Jonas, who's one of our museum docents. But she says it's when the Nazis make the Jews dance at the gate, when the tramway is coming through. So you're going from Jewish ghetto Warsaw to Jewish ghetto Warsaw with the public tramway going in between, and they stop the traffic to allow the tram to go through.
Right.
And both it's Hilton and Veronique Jonas.
So did someone actually recognize the name of this piece?
No, nobody has given the name. Anybody in the audience, anybody have an idea what the name of the piece is? It's a famous klezmer piece that they made sound a little, well, the way Galit played it, it sounds a little fancier. Let me put it that way.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so if no one will say it, I will let you know that this was a very famous klezmer piece called Mayo Fuß, but it also is known as Tanz Yidelech. And that is a piece that I think even today is played in happy occasions in Orthodox communities, even weddings. So it was, in my opinion, the way that the klezmer band was playing and the Nazis that took this tune titled Tanz Yidelech and yelled at the people, Tanz Juden, mocking them with their own heritage, with their own music, was for me as a musician a very tragic moment, especially because according to my readings, music in camps was very central. And spelling of music,
I got it.
I'm just, yeah. So the the idea of using music as a way to torture people, especially their own music, for me was a very tragic and just one of the more tragic scenes in the movie.
Yeah, I also, the way you juxtaposed what the Germans were doing in the name of the song, I think is very, very important. So the song, as Galit says, it's called Tanz Yidlach. It means dance Jews. And the Germans are, the Nazis are also saying Tanz Juden, but it's not the same thing. Tanz Yidlach means, in Yiddish, means dance little Jews. The Yidlach is a diminutive, and in Yiddish, you use a diminutive when you're being affectionate and warm and embracing somebody. When the Germans say it and they say Tanz Juden, they're bastardizing that name by Germanicizing it, by taking it out of its homey and familiar settings and making it a mechanism for harassing and emotionally torturing the Jews who are waiting there. And Galit, you're absolutely right. It's a great catch, the way it, and also a play on what it means, the way they do it. And the Germans do this a lot, not just with music. I mean, the Germans are known for co-opting culture that has existed and using it for their own ends and their own purposes. We had talked about this before. The swastika, which is the German, becomes the recognizable symbol of Nazi Germany. But the swastika originates thousands of years before as an Eastern symbol for good luck. And the Nazis don't create it, they repurpose it, is what they do with this symbol that's widely known already before the Nazis even come to power. So
yeah, and as they did also music, there were people whose testimonies mentioned the playing of Beethoven and Wagner in camps. There was another Polish composer named Szymon Laks that was a concertmeister in Auschwitz-Birkenau orchestra, and they were ordered by command to play certain music, and at the same time they were banned from playing other music, such as Polish music, for example, or Jewish music. So the Nazis felt that they had the ownership on the German music, what they call the Aryan music, over any music made by Jews, Blacks, Polish, Russians.
Yeah, there's other, getting back to the banning of Polish music, when Spielman loses his family, so there is the large ghetto action, the large ghetto liquidation, or action. It occurs from July to September of 42, and more than 200,000 people are sent to the east, relocated to the east for labor, and his family is relocated. They're sent to Treblinka, and they die on arrival. Nobody survives Treblinka for more than about 24 hours. You're brought into Treblinka, you're gassed to death. That's it. He is supposed to be gassed, but he's pulled out of line by a Jewish ghetto policeman who, in the story as Polanski tells it, has vague friendly feeling for him. In the story as Spielman tells it, pulls him out of line because Spielman was famous, and so he wants to save the life of this famous guy. So Spielman's family goes to their death. And then Spielman spends the next 3/4 of a year or so on a work detail, a Jewish work detail that goes in and out of the Warsaw ghetto and into the Christian side of Warsaw, on crazy building details. And they encounter a Nazi officer on that side who's pretty sadistic and who whips Spielman when he drops a load of bricks at one time, shoots a bunch of other prisoners, just randomly goes down the line and pulls them out. And it's not clear that they're all Jewish. I think they may be a mix of Jewish and Polish Christians. At one point after the new year occurs, so it's going to be winter 42 into 43. There's a very, very interesting scene that involves music where the drunken officer this time whips a few of them, but doesn't kill anybody, and asks, why am I drinking it? And they say, well, it's New Year's. And he says, you know, sing, sing. And so the workers continue to march, and they begin to sing. And if you listen to the lyrics that they're singing, it is a Polish nationalist hymn that they're singing, or nationalist anthem, and he has no idea what he's listening to. So that was a very interesting use of music as something subversive, I thought.
Yes. What I read about music and command in work labor camps was that something very similar to what we saw in the movie, that workers were forced to march while an orchestra was playing a music in a certain rhythm, and they were forced to march in a certain exactly that rhythm, and if they didn't, they were shot to death. They were marching with the music out of the labor camp and in the evening. What is interesting, which and I think that this is a Polanski take and not an actual real fact, is that I do not think the Germans would be okay with the prisoners singing their own Polish music because that was banned. And another reference to Shimon Laks, who actually found some again, when I read his memoir, I did have questions about how is it that you found a musical score in a concentration, I'm sorry, in a death camp such as Auschwitz, but he did find some Polish polonaises, which he called Warsaw polonaises, and they would play those Polish polonaises only when the Nazi officials were not there to hear them. So I agree with you that that was a very strong scene.
Victoria Maddox, who's one of the participants, asked a question, and this gets to your more specific area of expertise. She wants to know if that didn't happen in the camps as well, that there was the singing and the playing of subversive music and songs that the Germans weren't really aware of when it was happening. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, so there are testimonies by several people that, and I will put the name in the chat, Shimon Laks, who wrote, one second, this is the name of the composer. He wrote a memoir called Music from Another World. And he speaks exactly about this. For him, the fact that they were able to sneak in the sounds of Polish music while the Nazis were not listening was artistic, musical rebellion, musical resistance. And that is just one example. And I am sure a lot of you have heard of the very rich musical life that was taking place in Terezin concentration camp. And that place by itself had a wealth of compositions written that had incorporated Jewish music within pieces, within songs, within theater, music for piano. There were many ways for composers to incorporate those musical messages into those pieces. And what's interesting is very similarly to how Vladislav Spielmann is portrayed as a young Warsaw man that is very cosmopolitan, not so much someone who practices Judaism. A lot of those composers that similarly as him saw themselves Czech, German, Polish, would find themselves in the concentration camp writing music that had a lot of Jewish aspects to it. Even composers who had Jewish heritage and had transformed themselves to practice other religions such as anthroposophy or Christianity, found the Jewish roots back in those camps and wrote arranged music, especially in Yiddish, Hebrew songs from Eretz Israel that made their way into the camps. And that would be a whole conversation for another meeting, because there's hundreds of pieces that are just amazingly beautiful and really serve as a document to what had happened to those people.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit more about piano music and how it appears in the film. So the next time that you see Spielmann playing, and I put playing in quotation marks because he's thinking and pretending to play, but he's not actually playing, is when he's made it from the Jewish Warsaw Ghetto to the Christian side. He's being hidden in an apartment by Christians, and there's an upright piano, and he can't play it, but he pretends to play. Can you talk a little bit about the why he does that, or what he plays? And I think it's Chopin again at that point. But
yes, so I think that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was a mazurka, but I may have to check it.
okay.
So there is something very physical that happens to a pianist who doesn't practice. When we practice daily, this is also something that I teach my students. The daily practice develops our muscles and the joints and the not only in the fingers but in the arms and in the entire body. But when we and then there is something that is has to do with muscle memory. So we remember the music in our heads. We're able to listen to the music in the head, and we're also able to bring the commands from the brain to the hands and produce beautiful music. But when we do not play enough or daily, the memory of the music is still there, but the fingers cannot move as well. And there was that scene, I'm not sure, Sarah, if this is the scene you're referring to, but that is the scene that he, just before he met the Nazi commander, and he hears the Chopin Ballade #1 in his head, and then he practices it away from the piano.
Right, he doesn't actually touch the piano.
Yeah, and for many of us, it's called practicing away from the piano. So you are really practicing it, the music, but without the physical touch on the keys. I do want to mention a few other aspects of the music. You have to go now. This is my daughter, and she's supposed to be in bed. Okay, so the aspect of beginning the movie where the family parts with the Bechstein grand piano, and then by the end of the movie, we're close to the catharsis. We know that he will survive, and he meets a small upright that sits there in isolation throughout the years of the war. It has dust on the keys. And after that, he plays for after that scene, the scene where he plays for the Nazi official, and that's when Chopin's ballad culminates into what we see as a piece. There is the Nazi officer, there is the Jewish pianist, and then there is Chopin that had, there was, I don't want to say a ghost, but Chopin was there in his image of this all Polish musician, and all those three come at the end in a way of peace.
Mm-hmm.
There was one more thing that I felt a bit pained about when the Nazi officer was captured.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked one of the guy that was was walking there and yelling at the Nazis and say, "You took my music, you took everything for me." And then the Nazi officer to him and say, "I saved Spielmann. Tell him, I'm Rosenfeld." And then one more thing, this passiveness of Spielmann, as it's portrayed in the movie, that he comes back to an empty field and he thinks, well, yes, somebody had done this for me, and that's where it ends. And then we learned that that Nazi officer died in Russian captivity in 1952. So again, I guess I feel that maybe at that point where he plays for him, mm-hmm. and the Rosenfeld sits there and just takes it in. There is, I don't know if you can say that there was love there, but there was definitely a way for us to feel the emotion of the perpetrator in ways that we haven't seen it until that point, thanks to Chopin.
Well, I would also add that this is, again, this is Polanski's artistic license. So Wilhelm Hossenfeld, that officer, he was a captain, was in fact not a supporter of the Nazi regime. He fought for the regime because that was what he had to do. He helped a number of Polish Christians. He helped a number of Polish Jews, including Spielmann. What you don't see him do in this film, but what he did, according to Spielmann's memoir, is he helped Spielmann find a better, more secure place to hide. He actually brought food to Spielmann repeatedly over the course of several months that they were in contact with each other. He did give Spielmann his coat, as you see him do here. But Spielmann isn't entirely passive either, because Spielmann, between 45 and 52, I think, is when he dies, Hossenfeld dies in under the tender mercies of the Soviets, tries to find Hossenfeld and get him brought back from the Russian or the Soviet East, and he's unsuccessful, but he does try. Yeah. So again, there's less passiveness than you see in this movie. Although I will say that, and a couple of the audience members talked about this earlier on. Victoria did, and Gladwin did, about his detachment as being a self-preservation tactic. I don't think it's a Spielmann self-preservation tactic. I think it's a Polanski / Adrian Brody construction, but it makes the movie work. It makes the film work. I mean, you look at Brody's eyes and his facial expressions, and that's really how you understand what's going on around him, because he doesn't play enough music over the course of the film as a pianist to have it flow from his fingers through the instrument to the audience. So his face becomes the instrument. In many ways, that becomes his piano. I mean, it's a strange, I guess, comparison to make, but that's what I'm left with every time I watch the film.
Yeah. I also think that perhaps those of us who see his character as a passive one, it helps us, I'll speak personally, it helps me learn about the historical events in a more productive way than to get attached to one person, because the Holocaust is not about one person, it's about 6 million. And there are so many stories that will never be told about the atrocities that had been done to them. So I feel that, especially the year the film came out, 2002, there were not many films in the United States about the Holocaust. Schindler's List came in 1993, I believe, so that is 9 years earlier. There was a need to tell the story of the Holocaust more than the story of one person.
Mhm.
And I feel that by that, the movie did a great service. Not so much telling Spielman's activism, which we can read about in his memoir, but definitely a great service for history.
Yeah, I also think that there was some putting Spielman and even the Jewish experience of the Holocaust to the side just for a moment. Some of the almost final scenes in the movie were utterly incredible. When the Nazis pull out, Hossenfeld leaves, and Spielman emerges from hiding. And before he sees anybody, he's wandering down what looks almost like a moonscape. I mean, the city is devastated, and all you see around him are non-paved roads because they've been pounded back to dirt, and hulks of buildings that are falling down. It's a brilliant image to leave you with at that point, and it's accurate to postcards that I've seen that were taken at the very, very end of the war. So this would have been January, February of 45, as the Soviets are moving in and the Nazis are moving out. And some of these visual reminders just stick with you. And what you don't develop an awareness of from this film is that the Nazis pull out, leaving this rubble behind them. The Soviets pull in, but the Soviets are in many ways not a liberating force when they come into Poland. They are an occupying force. They have no intention of liberating Poland from a larger, kind of imperial overlordship. It's just a different overlordship. And it's very, very interesting to me to go back to where we sort of started talking about this, when you talked about Spielman deciding to remain in Poland. He's not going to leave. And it was fascinating to me when he talks to the Nazi officer, and the officer says, "What do you intend to do when the war is over?" And he doesn't miss a beat. He says, "Stay in Poland and be a pianist." I mean, he's going back to where he started in all of this. It's as if he hasn't experienced any of this around him, because that is so central to who he is. Can you talk to us a little bit? You're a pianist. What is that? As a historian, I don't have whatever that is. So can you explain a little bit of that?
I want to be able to speak for everyone else, but I'm sure every musician has their own view. My personal view of being a musician is that I always loved music. I grew up with music in the schools. And at some point, the music takes you. It's not so much that you choose it at the beginning, but then it becomes a sort of a religious practice. It becomes a part of a person's identity. It's not a job where I begin at 9 and I finish at 5, but it's something that lives with me 24/7. You can never take break from music. I'm sure there are people in other professions that feel the same way. But being a musician is sometimes the highest of all. It's how some people feel about other life missions, about the religions, and about other practices. And I feel that especially for Spielman, he never saw in the way he's portrayed in the movie, he never saw anything else. He saw the music and he saw survival. And that is in a nutshell how I see that. I want to provide an example for all those composers and performers who were murdered during the Holocaust. These were people who music was more than their religious identity. And they took music with them until the end. One example is a Berlin-born composer, James Simon, who was an amazing pianist, a musicologist, a composer, who very similarly to Vladislav Spielman, as he's portrayed in the movie, his mind was always in the music. It wasn't in his children and his wife, or in the ways that he would have to provide for his family, but he always composed. He composed on the train that took him from the Netherlands to Terezin. So he was someone had witnessed it, and he was in such denial of the Holocaust and of what was about to happen that whatever musical piece he wrote had always this nostalgic feel of a post-romantic German music. And I will put his name in the chat for those interested in his biography, James Simon.
What you're essentially saying is that for many musicians, this isn't a job, it's a calling.
It's the essence, yes, it's the essence of living and feeling. And especially for those who play music and teach music from the heart, it's something that is in our body. It's not something that we do and stop, but just this continuous.
It's essential. I mean, it's who you are. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
That makes sense to me. That does make sense. So what I would like to ask you to do just very briefly is tie this in very lightly to the composers that you've studied, because many of the composers that you've studied didn't compose from hiding, which is what he did. They composed while in the camps, while under immediate threat of death. I mean, he's under some threat, but it's not the same kind of threat.
Yes. Let me really quickly just share with you some of the videos, and you can listen to those at any time. But there are a lot of compositions there by composers who died in Terezin, and Shimon Lax, who survived. There is something to say about music as a way to heal, as a way to resist, and as a way to cope. What we had seen in The Pianist is that he had his musical spirit perhaps helped him survive by having this plan to remain, to keep doing what he was born to do, play music after the war, as he told Rosenfeld. But the composers who were incarcerated in Auschwitz, in Terezin, in other camps, Dachau, Buchenwald, there was music in each of those camps. And there were many ways for that music to help them, for us, it's a memory. For us, it's a historical document. It's a story told in sound. For them, it was means of survival. It was means of healing, means of recalling the music that many of them heard in their childhood and incorporated this in their music, which they composed in the camps. A good example would be Gideon Klein, who also was a young, promising virtuosic pianist and composer. And he wrote, he both incorporated Czech children's songs into his music. He incorporated Hebrew songs from Eretz Israel into his music. He learned from such teachers who were the descendants of the second Viennese school in Berlin. He incorporated all those different things into his music, and he left us with ways to appreciate what he had gone through. I don't have the music in front of me, but I just want to play just a few measures from a piano sonata.
I was just going to ask you, and then I was going to ask you something else as well, Galit,
Yes.
which is, and we would have to figure this out on the back end, but it would be spectacular if we could do some sort of a program with you. Annie, don't get really furious because it's your job, not mine, to give us, highlight a few of these Jewish composers and some of their work over the course of a program for our audience. I mean, today isn't the day, but.
Thank you. I would love to. Let me share with you. Well, I don't actually.
Thanks, Galit. We're going to hold you to that.
Okay. Let me just play a few measures of a Klein sonata.
Okay.
This is the first movement. And that is just the opening for a very violent 10-minute piece that is telling the story of his life in Terezin. I would need more time to tell you about it and to tell you about what I hear as secret messages that he incorporated in this music. But he wasn't. This was only one facet of his rich music. There was a composer named Pavel Haas who wrote many songs, who incorporated Czech national hymns into his chamber music. Victor Ullmann, who wrote a very large collection of piano sonatas before he entered Terezin and during Terezin. Ullmann, who saw himself a Christian, who in Terezin wrote songs, arranged Yiddish songs for voice and piano for his fellow inmates who were practicing Judaism. So I would say, to sum this all up, there are many ways to tell the stories of the Holocaust and what happened there. There's music that was composed and performed in camps, and there was music that was a vehicle for people like Vladislav Shpilman to survive just by feeling it in every inch of his body during his survival. And I do want to mention that he did create music while working as a pianist at a cafe in the Warsaw ghetto.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. That is all the time we have this evening. Galit, thank you. That was wonderful. Galit, also, thank you so much. We have every intention of bringing you back.
Thank you so
Annie,
much.
can you